part of Israel, and we are part of that miracle. We've been grafted in, and we are always intensely interested in those things that happen to and around concerning Israel. And hopefully we can just share a few of those thoughts this afternoon and reaffirm our great belief in that miraculous nation, and of course the hope that that is espoused by it. Now, when we talk about a miracle, the word miracle, or the term miracle, is used in a variety of ways in today's society. So, for example, oftentimes, people will talk about that there was an exceptional product or achievement or something outstanding, and so they'll say, the miracle of modern medicine, or it was a miracle of engineering that particular structure, or something like that. I mean, I heard we're just about to, in Sydney, get a new metro line opening up between Chatswood and out to Bankstown via the city. And, I read something in the paper and they were talking about it being a miracle of engineering feat to, weave this modern piece of engineering structure in amongst all the old train network that's been there for 100 years or more. So that's a common way that people use the term miracle, but it's not really how we would think of a miracle as it might relate to Israel, the people, the land, the nation, because it's just talking about something interesting or remarkable, perhaps something that we can't understand because we don't have expertise in that particular field, but not something of a supernatural nature. Now, the second way that the term miracle can be understood and is used is where it's talking about an event or a development that brings a very welcome consequence, but doesn't still have supernatural overtones. So, for example, a current one that people are talking about was, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Now, some people said it was a miracle that he wasn't killed by that bullet that clipped his right ear, I think it was. Okay. And yes, it was remarkable. And of course, some people think that it was genuinely miraculous, like that God had a hand in it, and that Donald Trump is the Messiah, and that he was spared as a result of that. But most people, when they say, it was a miracle he wasn't hit, or rather he wasn't killed, they don't mean in a supernatural way. So that's another way that it's used. But of course, the third way that it is used, and the way that we're going to be talking about the nation of Israel, is where a very extraordinary or welcome event does occur, but it is not explainable by natural or scientific laws, and therefore we attribute it to a divine agency. Right? So, for example, Jesus rising from the grave, that is a miracle. Right, and when it is a supernatural phenomena, something that we can't understand or explain in any way, in any natural way, and that's how we're going to look at our subject this afternoon: the nation of Israel, the people, and the land, and the nation are not explainable in any natural sense, even though the people themselves, the people of that land, the nation of Israel, do often attempt to explain it in just a natural way. So let's have a look at it. Is the nation of Israel a supernatural event? Well, yes, of course. If God had a direct and controlling hand in the events, then there's really no other explanation for the fact that it is a supernatural event. It is beyond natural phenomena. So what we're going to do is look at it across a scope of aspects. Now, first of all, the very beginning of the nation, it was a miracle. Let's open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 12. Very well-known words, but we're just going to follow that through for a moment. So I'm just juggling between a couple of different iPads here for different purposes, but I should be able to dispense with this one in a moment. So the beginning of the nation of Israel was a miracle, because the nation was never going to happen if natural processes were left to themselves. Now, first of all, in Genesis 12, verse 1, now Yahweh had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curses thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So right at the very beginning, there was a promise of supernatural intervention. God was going to make these things happen as far as this nation was concerned. And we see this supernatural hand in place right through the beginnings of the nation of Israel. So if we flick across a couple of pages and come to chapter 15 and verse 1, we see the development of this supernatural intervention. Chapter 15, verse 1, after these things, the word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision. Don't fear not, Abram, I'm thy shield, thy exceeding great reward. Abram's worried, verse 2, because I've got no children. How's this going to happen? Verse 3, Abram says, behold, you've given to me no seed. And so we know the story. We come to verse 5, where God says to Abram, look now toward the heaven, tell the stars if you are able to number them. And he said unto him, so shall thy seed be. God was going to intervene and make it happen, even though on a natural scale it was not happening. Even though the promise had been made, it just wasn't happening. And God was here re-emphasising the fact that he would make it happen. And so to me, one of my favourite verses in the entire Bible, which is also picked up in the New Testament, verse 6, he believed in Yahweh and he counted it to him for righteousness. I just love that. I love that verse. And then, come across the first verse of chapter 16. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children. It still wasn't happening, right? There'd been promises from God. There was going to be supernatural intervention. Still wasn't happening. Chapter 17 and verse 1. Now, Abram's 99 years old, and there's still another promise. Verse 6, I'm going to make you exceeding fruitful. I'm going to make nations of you. Right, but it still hadn't happened. And then we come to verse 15. God says to Abram, as for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be, because she was going to be blessed, verse 6, and a son would be given to her. And so we see there was somewhat almost desperation on Abram's part, because he'd received these promises. It didn't seem to be happening, but then we come across to chapter 21 and verse 1, and Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did unto Sarah as he had spoken. So a miracle occurred. The barren was made fruitful. She was given that promised son, and so we have the beginnings of that amazing nation that we're going to have a little bit of a look at this afternoon. So the beginning of the nation was a miracle. Well, what about the further on in the history? Well, there was miracles that occurred all the way through their history. God made promises to the nation, but he also said that they would be punished if they did not obey his commands. And so he was, and so they were. Oh, hang on, sorry, oh no, that's okay. Got a little message that popped up on this screen, but it's not coming up on yours, so that's good. So God promised that he would look after them if they obeyed him, but of course that they would be punished. And we looked a little bit at this in Jeremiah this morning, that they would be punished if they did not obey his commands. So as Israel grew, and despite many other hardships and other nations trying to destroy it, God had a direct hand in looking after them. In Jeremiah chapter 30 again, we'll be looking at this in our daily readings again shortly, in Jeremiah chapter 30 in a week or two. And verse 11, Jeremiah spent his whole life telling the people of Israel and Judah a very unpopular truth, that the Babylonians were coming, that they would be taken into captivity, that Jerusalem would be sacked, but that they would return after 70 years. And all of this came true because God had declared it. So we know well the prophecy of Jeremiah chapter 25, verses 11 and 12, for example, that talk about the fact that they would be taken into captivity, but they would come again after 70 years. Now, similarly, Jesus prophesied that Jerusalem was going to be taken over by Gentiles, that is, by non-Jews, but again that situation would not continue indefinitely. And we know very well the prophecy of Luke chapter 21, which spoke about how that Jerusalem would be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled. And we can see exactly on the screen there a couple of examples of the fulfillment of that prophecy. This is very well known one over here that can be seen in Rome today, in the Arch of Titus, and the sacking of Jerusalem and the candelabra being removed from the temple, as well as other associated implements from there. And of course, in Jerusalem itself, and I know that many of you have visited this exact same spot, where we see direct evidence of the fulfillment of that prophecy of where that the stones of the temple would not remain standing, which was a remarkable prophecy, considering that it had been so many years in construction. It was one of the wonders of the world at that time, and yet Jesus prophesied that it would be completely destroyed, and within a very short space of time, it in fact was fulfilled exactly as he prophesied. So again, there was such unlikelihood for these things to occur in a natural way that for Jerusalem, rather for the people of Israel to be taken into Babylon, but then to come again. It was very unlikely that the temple would be destroyed, considering all of the effort and the status of that temple in the world at the time, and yet these things took place exactly as Jesus prophesied. And of course, the restoration of the, or rather the destruction of the temple and the people being taken away is seen very, very graphically. Probably a little hard to see there on the screen, but the well-known story of the zealots who were taken from the synagogue at Masada, or rather from the Masada fortress, and of those the fragments, the lots that were found of where the final inhabitants of Masada, they cast lots as to who would be the final ones for them to finish their lives, so that they would not be taken captive by the Romans at that time. And that was, of course, a prelude to the remarkable prophecy of Ezekiel chapter 37, because it said that, yes, that they would be made as a valley of dry bones. And that's what we saw at the time of AD 70, when the nation was destroyed and Jerusalem was destroyed, the temple was destroyed, and they were scattered to the four winds of the earth. And again, a miraculous intervention that God was able to bring about, that those dry bones would be gathered together, that sinews would be placed upon the flesh, would come upon those bones, and then he would breathe life into them. And as he said, that these bones are the whole house of Israel. These bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried and our hope is lost. We are cut off for our parts. But that was not the end, because God was intervening and continued to intervene. But it was a long time coming before we see the next part of the restoration of that nation. And I've just summarised this in a very, very brief way, that after AD 70 and the Roman rule, that was followed by centuries of domination by many successive foreign powers: the Byzantine, the Arab, the Crusaders, the Mamluk, the Ottoman, and the British. And for all intents and purposes, for 2,000 years, it looked as though God had stopped performing miracles with Israel, didn't it? And you can imagine that they would have, the people would have despaired when they saw what was happening. However, he had not stopped performing miracles, because we had the beginnings of the restoration of the Jewish state, and those things took on a very, well, there was very slow progress during the 1800s until we got to the end of the 1800s, and this particular man by the name of Theodor Herzl, who was instrumental in bringing about the modern state of Israel as we know it. And there's a quote from Theodor Herzl from the 3rd of September 1897 at Basel, which is in Switzerland. I founded the Jewish state. Well, that was a bold statement. He didn't actually found the Jewish state, but we know what he meant by that. If I said this out loud today, I would be greeted by universal laughter. I love this. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50 years, everyone will perceive it. Well, we all know, add 50 years on to 1897, and we get to those momentous events of 1947 and 1948. So it was indeed very prophetic of Theodor Herzl. And it's interesting that he was an instrument of God to bring this miracle of the modern nation of Israel about. But he was prepared, he was so desperate for the nation of Israel to be re-established that he was prepared eventually to make a compromise. Because the Bible and God's purpose was that Israel would be a nation in their own land again. But Theodor Herzl was butting heads with leaders of the various European states and so on, and he could not get agreement for them to give them, land in Palestine. And eventually he was prepared and started to promote a Jewish state in Africa, in the land of Uganda, or what we know as Uganda today. And so you can see on the map there, that's what was actually what was proposed. And Theodor Herzl was caving in to the pressure. But we know from Ezekiel 37 verse 12, it says that they would be brought into the land of Israel. And so when Theodor Herzl started to cave into that pressure, he died quite suddenly. He was taken off the scene. Again, I believe that it was God's hand at work here, because God was wanting to bring about the establishment of that nation in the country, in the land of Israel. And had Theodor Herzl remained on the scene and remained pushing for the compromise position to go into Uganda, then that prophecy would not have been fulfilled. Interesting little snippet, particularly for some of the younger ones, perhaps even the older ones don't know this, but there was actually a proposition for the state of Israel to be formed in Australia at that same time, in the Kimberley, up in the area of Western Australia. And it was called the Kimberley scheme, or the Kimberley proposal. This is the original map that was drawn up as part of that proposal, and it was considered somewhat seriously. It was being promoted by prominent Zionists at that time. To give you an idea of where that is, that's the Western Australian Northern Territory border, that's running through there, and that's the town of, pardon me, Wyndham, up in the Kimberley area there. The Ord River. Now the map looks very different because you've got the enormous Lake Argyle in this area where the Ord River was dammed, and like for the ladies, pink diamonds from Lake Argyle, from the Argyle mine. That's where they come from, that area there, from where it talks about Argyle Downs. But this was a proposal. So had God not intervened, we may have had the state of Israel in Australia. Okay, now a lot of people are not aware of that, so it's an interesting thing to contemplate. But of course, God's hand was at play, and so that was not allowed to take place. God's hand was at play in so many ways. His hand was at play in the nations of the world, in the British government that were given the mandate to look after and help to bring about the re-establishment of the nation and to deliver it from the hand of the Ottoman. And so we have the very famous, what's called the Balfour Declaration, which was a declaration, and this on the screen, I'll read it to you because you may not be able to see that there. And again, for the younger ones that might not be familiar with this, this was a letter written to Lord Rothschild, who was you might have heard of the name Rothschild, very prominent Jewish, British, American banking and investment family, very, very wealthy family, but they were also very prominent Zionists, and together with the involvement of Chaim Weizmann, we haven't got time to go into all that this afternoon, but this was another very significant moment in the miracle of the modern nation of Israel. And so here, Balfour, on behalf of the British government, he says, "Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet," that is the British Cabinet. "His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation." Now, of course, in that promise and declaration, the British promised to do things that were impossible, but that never stopped them in the past. There were these conflicting concepts there that were irreconcilable. But nevertheless, this was a watershed moment in the British government promoting the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And the amazing and interesting thing was that on that very day, well, this letter was written a couple of days later, but on the very day when that was declared by and brought to the attention of the British Cabinet, and that they approved that, on that very day in 1917, another aspect of Bible prophecy in relation to the establishment of the nation of Israel happened, and it was on this rather innocuous-looking plain, but this is the plain of Beersheba, and it's probably very difficult for you to see that, but this was a photograph that we took there, and again, many of you have probably seen the exact same spot. And this photograph is taken on Tel Beersheba, of the ancient town of Beersheba. And the reason I particularly like this is because it does describe the Australian light horse, but you'll not, for the eagle eye there, you will see the New Zealand silver fern symbol there. Because why? Because the New Zealanders were the ones who were tasked with taking control of Tel Beersheba. So while the Australian light horse were out here off to the left of stage, as it were, they were waiting for the New Zealanders to take control of the Tell, because it overlooked them. If they didn't have control of that, the whole thing would have been a disaster if the Turks had still had control of that. And so after a tremendous amount of fighting, and the delay was much longer than they had hoped, because it was a fierce battle, that the New Zealanders eventually took control of Tel Beersheba. It was only then that the light horse could then approach Beersheba to take it. And of course, we all know, that it was a very, very famous event in both world and Australian history of the last great charge of infantry using horses. It's the last time it's ever happened. It will never happen again. And the decisive battle that took place. So for those that are interested in history and don't know that much about it, get hold of something on this and learn about the miracle that took place on that day as well, where God's intervention was such that the seemingly impossible happened, and that was that the Australian and New Zealand troops were able to take control, and this was the watershed moment in driving the Turks out of the occupation of the nation of the land of Israel at that time. And interestingly, so just bringing those two events together, we see this article from the Jerusalem Post, and this was at the 100-year anniversary from October the 30th, 2017. But this article in the Jerusalem Post says that Balfour's real victory came at Beersheba. Historians have recorded how General Allenby, who was the commander of the British troops at that time, had given each of his soldiers a Bible, and he was often found on his knees looking for direction from above, which is an interesting thing, isn't it? You can't imagine too many military generals and so on adopting that today. But nevertheless, there was a sense from General Allenby, and there was certainly a sense from Bible students, that these things were miraculous events that were taking place on the same day that the Balfour Declaration was made. Then the drying up of the river Euphrates, as we know it from what it speaks about in Revelation 17, the drying up of the Euphrates took place where Beersheba was taken control, and then eventually they were able to come into the rest of the land and to Jerusalem. And we've got those, those famous images, which I haven't put in this afternoon, of Allenby coming in through the gates into Jerusalem. But these events were all, of course, at the direction of God's hand, and they were being brought about to fulfill that prophecy that we saw from Ezekiel chapter 37 and from other places. And the other interesting thing, while we're on the history, and for the young people that might study, for example, Gallipoli, the unsuccessful campaign at Gallipoli in World War I, where the Anzac Day tradition has come about from that withdrawal and so on. From a divine perspective, I believe that the Gallipoli campaign was unsuccessful because it was not in God's purpose for the Allies to go for the throat, as it were, of the Turkish Empire at that stage, because Revelation specifically says that there would be a drying up of the Turkish power. The whole idea of the Gallipoli campaign was that they were going for Constantinople. They were going for the heart of the Ottoman Empire, and that was not to be. That was not to be. It was going to dry up from around the edges, and this drying up, or part of that drying up, was the taking of Palestine from the periphery of the Ottoman Empire, not to go to the heart of it and for it to be, to be killed in one fell swoop, as it were. So again, in hindsight, I think we can see the hand of God in these things, where Gallipoli was unsuccessful, but the Beersheba campaign was against all odds. Okay, as you can tell, I get quite excited about those things and have a great interest in this. Now, I think I have got a little video clip here which might be of interest. I hope it will come up. We'll see, and you'll be able to hear it. Let's see. This was just a little news article that was given in 2017. So I'll try and play it. We'll see how we go.
2 years after the disaster of Gallipoli in 1915, the British Imperial forces had gained momentum against the Turks, and their advance now rested on breaking the Ottoman Empire's grip on a 42-kilometre stretch of...
Let's try that again. We'll give it one more try. Is there any chance that that's going to work if I try it again or not? I'll give it one more crack. That's an excellent question. What about I'll try and... No idea. It doesn't. We'll just give it one more try.
2 years after the disaster of Gallipoli in 1915, the British Imperial forces had gained momentum against the Turks, and their advance now rested on breaking the Ottoman Empire's grip on a 42-kilometre stretch of road, trenches and barbed wire running from Beersheba, in what is now known as Israel, to the fortress of Gaza on the coast. Now, hitting Gaza directly twice before had failed, killing 10,000 Allied soldiers. So, by October, an elaborate plan had been hatched to take the Beersheba end instead, involving more than 60,000 troops, 15,000 desert-mounted corps and the Anzac mounted units. From dawn till late afternoon, horse-mounted units had edged in, but none had got much closer than about 2 kilometres from the city limits. Time was running out, and 800 men and horses forming Australia's 12th and 4th Light Horse Regiments, drawn mainly from New South Wales and Victoria, were about to make up for it. Galloping at high speed into volleys of enemy fire, the Australians leapt clear over the last line of Turkish defences, trenches nearly 1.5 metres wide, and right over the heads of stunned Turkish soldiers 3 metres below.
We could see the horses jumping the trenches, dust everywhere.
The Australians had stormed through with only handheld bayonets to defend themselves. The rifles slung over their backs were considered useless for firing when riding at such speed. Once over, the troopers still had to climb out of the saddle and engage in ground fighting with the Turks. Almost 40 were killed before the rest surrendered. By 11 o'clock that night, Beersheba, with its water wells, rail lines and weaponry, was under British control. Hundreds of Turkish soldiers had been killed, 1,100 taken prisoner, against the loss of 31 Australian lives. For a nation stung by heavy casualties in Gallipoli and on the Western Front, the stunning charge of the light horsemen at Beersheba quickly became the stuff of military legend. Their plucky traits of boldness, courage and ingenuity fed that emerging Australian character that the young nation was latching onto and which still endures today.
Yeah, so that just gives you a little bit of background there. Another interesting it just came to mind as I was watching another interesting connection with the Australian involvement in the fulfilment of that Bible prophecy is that immediately after that time, when the British were now in control of Beersheba, the very first administrator or mayor, I think it was, of Beersheba that was put into place there, his surname was, I can't remember his first name, but his surname was Hokasain. His grandson was Joe Hockey. That is, as in the Australian politician Joe Hockey, who the older ones will remember. So Joe Hockey's grandfather was the first mayor of Beersheba after the British took control in 1917. So I thought that was just quite an interesting little... and Hokasain became Hockey because when Joe Hockey's parents emigrated to Australia, they didn't want that foreign-sounding name, and so they changed by deed poll their name to hockey. Not sure exactly how that relates to anything, but I just thought it was interesting. Anyway, just to wake you all up. All right, so another little interesting side or piece of side news here is that as part of that campaign, of course, at Beersheba, there were many Australians and New Zealanders that were killed during that that campaign. And here's a photo of us here at the war grave, the war cemetery there at Beersheba that we took when we were there some years ago. And we're all clustered around a particular grave there. And again, this is just a little connection to Australia and in particular Sydney. We're clustered around the grave of Albert, or Tibby as he was known, Albert Tibby Cotter, and he was an Australian Test cricketer who was had played in, I forget how many Test matches, not very many, before he was sent to war, and he was killed in that battle for Beersheba. And today, for those that might happen to frequent that part of Sydney, can you see that walkway that goes over Anzac Parade there? Here's the you know, the Sydney Football Stadium and the cricket ground and so on. And there's this curving walkway that goes over Anzac Parade there that gets you across the road, obviously. And that's actually known as the Albert Tibby Cotter pedestrian bridge, named in honour of that Test cricketer who was killed during the Battle of Beersheba. So Australia, as one of the young lions of the British, had a huge role to play in the fulfilment of that Bible prophecy, and that just sort of you know, brings it rather close to home, doesn't it? So next time you happen to be in there, either driving along Anzac Parade and see the bridge going by, or if you happen to walk across it, spare a thought for the fulfilment of Bible prophecy as you are going across that bridge, because Albert Tibby Cotter was involved in that and of course lost his life, sadly, as did so many others at that time. So, of course, since that time, there have been miracles involved in the nation of Israel, so many miracles. And again, in Jeremiah chapter 16, again in our readings right at the moment, Jeremiah chapter 16. We just read that, I remember just reading it a day or two ago. Jeremiah 16, where the prophecy was made, "Behold, I will send for many fishermen, says the Lord, and they shall fish them. And afterward I will send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from out of every mountain and every hill, and out of the holes of the rocks." You see, God needed to re-establish the nation of Israel because he had declared it, but he needed people there. And initially the Jews were not keen to go there. And so there were both fishers and hunters. Theodore Herzl, we can imagine him as a fisher. He was trying to encourage the people to go. And there was a trickle of people returning to the land at that time. But of course, during the horrors of the Second World War and the Holocaust, there were the hunters, the Nazi regime, who hunted them out of every corner of Europe, and they had no safe haven except to go back to Israel. And I do love the fact, and again, it's probably very, very difficult to see there, but this is Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and inside it there. But right adjacent, I love the fact that in Jerusalem, you've got Mount, I can't even quite work it out. I think this is Mount Herzl. This is Mount Herzl here. And then you've got Yad Vashem, which I think is right here. Right next to each other in the city of Jerusalem today, you have these two memorials, Mount Herzl, which celebrates the work of Theodore Herzl. And from there, you can just walk down a pathway and come to Yad Vashem, which celebrates is the wrong word, but you know what I mean. The horrors of the Holocaust, and the fact that they are there, another one of my favourite words, juxtaposed, side by side. These two these two memorials to the fishers and the hunters. They're right beside each other in the city of Jerusalem today. I just find, again, I think it's more than just a coincidence. All right, what else have we got? Well, of course, this was a miracle again in the re-establishment of the nation of Israel. In 1947, after the horrors of the Holocaust and World War II were over, it was all too hard for the British. They threw their hands in the air and they handed it across to the United Nations General Assembly, who even today, and Laurie and I had the privilege of visiting there some few years ago now, but the anti-Semitism and the anti-Israeli sentiment in the United Nations is palpable for anyone that visits there, and even you get that sense from the proclamations that they make and so on. We felt it and saw it when we were there, of the anti-Semitism and the anti-Israeli sentiment. But nevertheless, that assembly was tasked with giving birth to the modern nation of Israel. And I think, again, this is another little video clip. I don't know if we need to tweak any dials for this one. We're all good. Let's give it a crack. I think this one.
At Flushing, Long Island, the General Assembly of the United Nations has made its decision on Palestine. The map shows what partition means. The Jewish state colored light, the Arab state dark, Jaffa to go to the Arabs, Jerusalem internationalized. There was heated debate in the assembly. This is the delegate from Saudi Arabia arguing against partition. Then Senor Arana of Brazil, presiding, calls on the nations to vote and announces how they vote.
Saudi Arabia? No. Soviet Union? Yes. United Kingdom? Abstain. The United States? Yes.
The resolution of the Deut Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
And this was the scene next day in Jerusalem. The Jewish people at once began to celebrate the United Nations decision. If they hadn't got all they wanted, they had at least gained the verdict for the setting up of a new Jewish state, and their rejoicing was obviously a spontaneous affair. Such was the immediate Jewish reaction in Jerusalem, and it was the same in Tel Aviv and elsewhere. The Arab reaction was to follow. 2 days later, this was the typical scene. Arabs advancing on the center of Jerusalem at the beginning of a 3-day strike and an orgy of wrecking, looting and bloodshed. Isolated police were more or less powerless to deal with the riot, which, beginning as a demonstration, quickly led to the burning of Jewish shops and the general destruction of Jewish property. During this time, fighting between Arabs and Jews was a commonplace occurrence, and there were many casualties on both sides through stabbing and shooting. And arrests were made on both sides. Here are some Jews being taken into custody after a rooftop chase. Grenades and revolvers were freely used by the rioters. Fires were soon blazing in many places throughout Jerusalem. The burning of the wrecked cinema is typical. The implementing of the United Nations decision is the big query. Meanwhile, Britain announces the ending of her mandate next May.
I can't remember how long that went on, but I think we get the idea. It's amazing how different the newsreels were in those days as well, isn't it? Now, and of course, you know, we know. I'm sure we're all familiar with this this history quite well. But there, at this rather inauspicious building in the middle of Tel Aviv, on the 14th of May, 1948. David Ben-Gurion announces the formation of the State of Israel. And of course, who's image do we see there? Theodor Herzl, who was really one of the most amazing founders of that entire process. Again, this is inside. This is just a photograph. It's not supposed to be a travel log this afternoon, but I thought it was interesting. This is a shot inside the Knesset in Jerusalem. Which is the Israeli Parliament. And this seat right down, I think it was this one here, is where the Prime Minister sits normally. But up on the back wall here, which I think, if you see that photograph there, this is in, I think it can't, there we go. There's a bit closer up, probably still not very clear. But who do they have a photograph of? Theodor Herzl up on the back wall of the Parliament. So they very clearly identify the foundation of their modern state as being very intimately involved with him. But of course, the modern nation of Israel do not see, the secular Jews do not see divine intervention despite everything that has taken place. They see it as having happened through their own skill and through their own power and through their own intelligence and so on. And so we've got more examples of the miraculous intervention during their history, the 6-Day War, which is studied in military schools and so on around the world because of the amazing result that took place in such a short space of time. All very well known particularly to the older ones of us. I remember as I was, well, in 1967, I was a 7-year-old boy. So it's not hard to work out how old I am now. But I remember I was too young to fully appreciate what was going on, but I do remember the excitement of my parents and their contemporaries as they saw these events unfolding. I can't remember exactly why I put this one in, but it was just to show, I guess, to show this was this is a Syrian stamp. How many countries in the world issue a stamp where you depict another one of your neighbours there with a bloodied knife through the heart of it? But that was the attitude of the Syrians and other Arab nations around. Now, if there was great excitement in 1967, there was great concern in 1973 because the Yom Kippur War was a very near-run thing, and the Israelis very, very nearly lost that war, and the battle, the tank battle that took place in the Valley of Tears up in the Golan Heights there, again, is an extraordinary story. Had the Syrians known how stretched the Israelis were at that time, they would have only just had to push a little bit harder and they would have defeated the Israelis, and the rest of history would be completely different in that part of the world. But again, I believe through God's intervention, the tank commander, Avigdor Kalani, I think his name is, who wrote a book, and he became the defense minister of Israel sometime after this, wrote of the extraordinary events that took place there again. But through divine intervention, the Israelis were able to overcome, again, insurmountable odds at that time. And I always like to put this photo in because it's one of Lauren's favourites on a good hair day. But this is overlooking, that's that Valley of Tears area just behind, or actually, yes, sorry, just in that area right behind us there. This is taken from Mount Bental, and that is Mount Hermon in the background. And interestingly, I was just talking to Rob about this at lunchtime. I hadn't seen it in the news, but just in the last 24 hours or so, the Hezbollah have shelled and damaged a Druze community, which is on the flanks of Mount Hermon there, the little Druze township there, with the name of which I won't try and pronounce now. But So this, again, this area is in contention. It is in the world's view yet again. And it could be that Israel has to fight yet another war on their northern front against Hezbollah if that, if this continues to escalate there. So that was just by the by that happened to be in there. But all of these areas are under God's watchful eye, and he is not ignorant, of course, of what is going on. I think this quote from Mark Twain is an excellent summary of the extraordinary situation that we find ourselves in when we look at the nation of Israel and their people. And I'll just read it to you in case you can't see that, because I think it may be familiar to some, but Mark Twain, who was an American author, famous American author, wrote a little treatise called Of the Jews, or About the Jews, or a title to that intent. And he said if the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 0.25% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of, but he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallest of his bulk. His contributions to the world list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvellous fight in this world in all ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. A very perceptive summary of the amazing results and the amazing situation that we find ourselves in with the land and the people and the nation of Israel. And so we ask ourselves the question, as we've sort of looked at a whole bunch of these things, are these things miracles? Is the nation of Israel really a miracle, or is it simply just marvellous? Rabbi Romain, he said, it's fine to talk about the miracle of the Six-Day War, providing it is just a way of expressing our sense of awe at how Israel not only survived the destruction we feared it would suffer, but showed its military prowess and tactical superiority. But claiming the Six-Day War was a miracle engineered by God is highly problematic as a theological statement. Instead, the victory is a tribute to the skill of Israeli commanders, the bravery of ordinary soldiers, and the careful preparations done beforehand. Some may have been inspired by their faith, others by the desire to defend their homeland, others because there was no other option. And that is a great summary of the way secular Jews view themselves today. Both, the diaspora throughout the world, as well as the Jews within the land. That's how they view themselves. And again, I remember there's this little presentation up at one of the cities, a major town in the Golan Heights, on the miracle of Israel. And in this presentation, it goes through all of the amazing things this is like a little cinema where you go in and you watch the presentation. It goes through all the amazing things that they've done, particularly with the Golan Heights. That's the focus of this one. But it's all attributed to their own prowess, their own skill, their own courage, their own ingenuity, and no credit is given to God at all. And so we ask ourselves the question, is it just that, or is it supernatural? If God had a direct controlling hand in the events, then it is yes. And I believe very firmly that the real evidence shows us that the nation of Israel is a continuous process of miracles. And I think we should get a few dot points just popping up here. We looked at the very beginning, where the beginning of the nation was a miracle. The destruction and the dispersion of the nation under the Babylonians was a miracle because of Jeremiah's prophecies that they would then also come back. The restoration of the nation was a miracle. Ezekiel's prophecy of dry bones, Jeremiah's prophecy of the fishers and hunters. God declared himself that the existence of Israel is a witness to the fact that he is alive. And so the very nation are testimony to God's own existence. And I think we might have one more screen of dot points. God promised that he would never allow the nation to be completely destroyed. Jesus himself predicted that again, Israel and Jerusalem would be controlled by non-Jews until just before his return. The modern revival and continuing viability of Israel is both remarkable and is also a genuine miracle. And so my final slide, I happened to see this one on the net. This was not my, I didn't produce this, I've just copied that, but I think it's a wonderful summary of our miracle of Israel. Israel is the only country in the world that bears the same name, speaks the same language, upholds the same faith, and inhabits the same land as it did 3,000 years ago. And when we add all those things together, and what we've seen there tonight, plus many other this afternoon, plus many other things that we haven't had time to talk about, I think it is fair to say that Israel is a miracle. Thank you.